This morning, as I sat listening to the music of the handbell choir and then to the sanctuary choir, I thought that perhaps singing a choir, ringing bells, would be a good metaphor for prayer. To pray, you have to clear out some time and devote yourself to it. For bells and for choir, you have to make time for rehearsal, for practice. Then you have to concentrate. The ringers on ringing their bell at the right time. And the sopranos and the altos and the basses and the tenors on singing their note. And sometimes, like in prayer, there's so much concentration on those moments that neither the handbells nor the choir are aware of the beautiful music that you and I hear. And so sometimes I wonder, as we are in our closets and we are praying in all of our different languages and all of our different ways, what wondrous melody of grace and love and mercy is turned loose into all of the universe. We can't hear it, but it resounds, and there are ears that hear. Paul, the great apostle Paul, limps into Corinth, shocked, stunned. He has come from Athens, where he has argued with the Jews and debated with the philosophers. In Acts chapter 17, we read that the Athenians loved to spend their time telling about something new or hearing about something new. And when Paul found this out about the Athenians, he was eager to engage them. So he stood there among the philosophers of Athens and complimented them on how religious they were. He described how on a tour of their beautiful city, he had taken note of their many temples and objects of worship and noticed that there was even an altar on which it was inscribed, "To an unknown God." And then Paul proceeded to reveal to them exactly who this unknown God was. This unknown God, Paul said to the Athenians, was the God who made the world and everything in it. This God called into being all the nations of the earth. And God assured the Athenians that this God was very close to them. For Paul said, "In this God we live and move and have our being." And there in Athens, Paul began to preach to the Athenians about Jesus without ever mentioning his name. But then Paul made a big mistake. In the presence of the learned philosophers of Athens, he mentioned the resurrection of the dead. And there he lost them completely. Some thought they might want to hear more about that, but others dismissed Paul in the worst way you can dismiss a preacher. They laughed him off the stage. Paul limps into Corinth, licking his wounds. He has attempted to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ to the philosophers of Athens, and they have scoffed at him. Paul knew, as you and I know, that to be a Christian means to believe in God. Not just any God, not just any belief, but to believe in the God that we meet in Jesus, to believe in the God we understand through Jesus of Nazareth. For you see, Paul believed quite simply that Jesus had come to reveal to us the very nature and character of the God who had created everything. Given his failure in Athens, perhaps Paul should have considered spending some time in Corinth rebranding his message. Branding is advertising lingo for attempting to make your business or product or service more enticing and appealing to the consumer. Perhaps even today we should encourage Paul to package his gospel in a new and more appealing way for a new and wonderful day. After all, at the heart of Paul's message was Jesus of Nazareth. When you think of it in that way, the gospel becomes a comforting and beautiful narrative simply because this man, Jesus, was so kind and gentle. Jesus blesses the little children. Jesus eats with outcasts. Jesus travels around to villages out in the midst of nowhere, preaching about the kingdom of God. Jesus teaches with intriguing stories, with surprising twists and turns that reveal to the listener hidden truths. Jesus heals the sick, makes lepers clean, restores emotionally, mentally disturbed people to their right minds. Jesus raises people to new life. And in all of these ways, Jesus reveals to us the very heart of God Himself. And so, Paul might conclude his sermon by saying to the people, this is simply the way God is. He is like Jesus. He is not cruel or mean or judgmental. No, God is gracious and understanding, accepting, caring, and loving. It's a wonderful and beautiful thing to believe in God. But sooner or later, someone is going to ask the Apostle Paul, what happened to your wonderful, wonderful Jesus? And then Paul is going to have to tell the truth. Well, my Jesus got in trouble with the religious authorities. They found him guilty of breaking some of their piddly little laws, but they didn't have the authority to kill him, so they accused him of treason against Rome. Pilate, the Roman governor, ordered his execution to keep peace with Rome. He was hung between two rebels just outside the holy city of Jerusalem. It seems our kind and gentle and caring Jesus meets death in the worst kind of way, the most humiliating kind of way, through crucifixion. And this Jesus, this wonderful, wonderful Jesus that Paul is described to us, is dead before his 34th birthday. And when Paul tells that story, there are bound to be more questions offered by those who truly want to know. Where was this Jesus killed? Well, he was in Jerusalem. Did he live there? No, not really. He was from Nazareth, about 80 miles north. Did he realize what was going to happen there? It appears he did. Did he know they were plotting to kill him? I would think so. One of his own followers betrayed him for 30 pieces of silver. Didn't his disciples fight to save him? No. They left him. They ran away to save their own necks. If he knew they were plotting to kill him, why didn't he leave town? And those listening to Paul answer these questions begin to shake their heads in disbelief. Because the fact that this kind and gentle Jesus was crucified makes absolutely no sense to them. And so the people begin to get up and walk out on Paul. They're not interested at all in a man from God who died in such a humiliating way. They don't want to be a part of a group that is founded on such a horribly depressing story. In their heart of hearts, they want something uplifting and inspiring that promises them happiness. They seek a God and a religion that makes them feel good about who they are and helps them have a good marriage and high-achieving children and good relationships with friends and promises that they will become healthy and wealthy and wise. But for these folks, there can be no cross. There can be no crucified Christ. Now, I'm sure that Paul understood all of this. As he would say, the Jews demand signs. The Greeks love a good argument. But we proclaim Christ and Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Greek philosophers. But God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. This is what Paul says. Even after he's been laughed off the platform in Athens. He knows this gospel does not play well. Who wants a God who suffers and dies? It didn't make sense in the first century, and it really doesn't make sense in the 21st century. In so many ways, the suffering and dying Christ is offensive to everyone. The believer, the agnostic, even the atheist. The believer asks, why? Why did Jesus have to die? To the agnostic, the concept of a crucified God is just beyond their grasp. And to the atheist, Jesus is just another poor idealist who wound up on the wrong side of the people of power and paid the price. There are hundreds just like him stretched across history. And I understand too, in the prevailing state of American Christianity, we are designing ourselves as best we can to appeal to the culture in which we live. And there is no place for the cross of Christ there. It's obvious. Preachers who proclaim Christ crucified don't fill arenas and stadiums. Preachers who proclaim Christ crucified don't host Caribbean cruises. They don't find their books on the New York Times bestseller list. Churches that lift up a crucified Christ are simply not successful by today's standards. That message doesn't meet the needs of the people of our day. People demand something positive. And this message of a crucified Christ is way, way too depressing. Churches that preach Christ crucified have crosses everywhere for people to see. They put their altars right out front, in the middle, in the center, so that every Sunday people can read, "Do this in remembrance of Him," so that everyone will remember His body was broken and His blood was poured out. And I guess the really offensive dimension of all of this is that if the cross of Christ is foolishness, then we, who call ourselves Christians, we are the clowns. The crucified Christ calls us to living our lives, trusting Him with our minds and with our hearts. Believing that this, what sounds like foolishness to the rest of the world, is wisdom from God's perspective. To believe that what appears so weak and powerless in the world is actually used to reveal God's power. God's strength is greater than human strength. And those who are perishing somehow know that they may be delivered, forgiven, saved, and reconciled by this one who was rejected and killed. And Paul says, if you don't believe this, if you don't believe that God's foolishness is wiser and greater than human wisdom and God's weakness greater than human strength, take a gaze around the church where you are worshiping today. There's no world-changing wealth here. There's no power here that we possess that can change the world. There are no world-changing connections here. The movers and shakers of our world are not here this morning. No, here are only the fools and the clowns, teaching and proclaiming Christ crucified. Yet, Paul says, in and through us, God is at work, saving the perishing. We are clowns in service to Jesus Christ, seeking those who are lost in the darkness of our time, liberating and restoring those whose lives have been twisted and ground up by shame and guilt. We're here healing and restoring those afflicted physically, emotionally, psychologically. We are here comforting the brokenhearted and the grief-stricken. We are here leading the addict out of the darkness of his own personal hell into new life when a power beyond themselves is discovered. And we are here binding up wounds that will only ultimately be healed in God's presence. We are the clowns who on most days cannot understand that we, as insignificant as we appear and fail, we are salt and light and leaven. We are God's witnesses in the world. We are the clowns, weak and powerless. Yet somehow in our weakness, the strength of God is revealed. Somehow in our powerlessness, the power of God is unveiled. Sometimes, for me, the image of a rodeo clown comes to mind. I'm sure there are not as many rodeo fans here as perhaps there are in other places. But perhaps you catch it spinning by on the television. A cowboy ties himself to an angry bull, waits in the chute. Out in the arena, perhaps in a barrel, is the rodeo clown. As soon as the cowboy hits the dirt, the clown is out of the barrel, running around, distracting the bull to save the cowboy. Perhaps that is what we are doing. When we entrust our lives to the crucified Christ, we lose our lives for the sake of the world. Now here is where it becomes the most foolish. Clowns, you and me, we carry crosses. Clowns, you and me, we deny ourselves. Clowns lose their life for the sake of finding new life in the kingdom. Clowns die to themselves in order to rise to a deeper and richer life. And this is where clowns and crosses become absolute foolishness in the world in which we live. Folks become so hung up on the cross that they cannot see what God has done in His powerlessness and His foolishness. They do not realize, or they refuse to realize, that dying and rising is the only way to new life. In the suffering and death of God Himself, darkness is shattered, the power of death is broken, mercy and forgiveness overcome revenge and judgment. Our suffering is given meaning, compassion heals, and love. Love becomes the only absolute reality in all of the universe. Perhaps at times, even the foolish clowns who give their lives to the cross wish that Paul had trudged off to Corinth and rebranded the whole gospel. But he did not, and we shall not. For as terrifying as it sounds, according to Jesus, dying is the only way to new life. Dying is the only way that we become truly free to live. The tragedy, it seems to me, is that we have made this promise of new life after dying so depressing, so fearful, that people cannot see that it is a hopeful and challenging adventure. We too seem to be so attached to the false promises of the world that we cannot discover joy that only God's clowns ever know. A joy that comes only in Christ. From time to time, I mention to you books that I think should be required reading for every Christian. Some of those books are challenging books. Sometimes those books are children's books. Sometimes I don't know if the book is for children or for adults. And so it is with Hope for Flowers. This book was first published in 1970 or 72. At that time, I was a student at Carson Newman College. I would go into the college bookstore. I'd see this book on the shelf, but I refused to buy it. I wanted to invest what little funds I had into the heavy books that could teach me about the mystery and the truth of Christianity. So I left it on the shelf and left it there until I was on my way out after graduation and I bought a copy. Years later, I shared it with someone who apparently still has it. So I had to try to replace this copy. And this weekend, fortunately, found it on a bookshelf down in South Carolina. The title of the book, Hope for the Flowers. A tale partly about life, partly about revolution, and a lot about hope for adults and others, including caterpillars who can read. A different sort of book for everyone except those who have completely given up. The story is about Stripe and Yella, two caterpillars. They come into the world, they eat, They sleep. They don't know what to do, but suddenly they see all of these caterpillars crawling up these pillars. They don't know what it is. They can't tell what it is. It stretches up in the sky, and all they see are brown caterpillars. So they conclude this is what caterpillars do. So they start crawling up. It's a messy world crawling up. Pushing, shoving, everybody trying to get ahead. Nobody knowing what's up there, but everybody intent on getting there. On the way up, Stripe meets Yellow. He pushes her out of the way so he can get on up the pillar. He feels bad. Finally, he looks at her. Finally, they decide to go back down the pillar. And they do. They go back down that pillar. They stop the striving and the going and the yearning and the climbing. And they eat and they sleep and they love one another. And that seems to be good enough. Until one day, Stripe begins to wonder, did I miss something? Isn't there more to life than just being here with Yellow? And so he goes back to start climbing up the pillars. He doesn't know where he's going, but he's determined to get to the top. But Yellow can't go there. That was not satisfying the first time, so she's not going back the second time. But she worries about Stripe. She worries about what's happening to him, what has happened to them. She wonders about where there is any meaning in life for lowly caterpillars. Until one day, this is what happens. One day, a gray-haired caterpillar hanging upside down on a branch surprised her. He seemed caught in some hairy stuff. "You seem in trouble," she said. "Can I help?" "No, my dear. I have to do this to become a butterfly." Her whole insides leapt. Butterfly. That word, she thought. "Tell me, sir, what is a butterfly?" "It's what you are meant to become. It flies with beautiful wings and joins the earth to heaven. It drinks only nectar from the flowers and carries seeds of love from one flower to another. Without butterflies, the world would soon have few flowers." "I can't believe it's true," gasped Yellow. "How can I believe there's a butterfly inside you or me when all I see is a fuzzy worm?" "How does one become a butterfly?" she asked pensively. "You must want to fly so much that you're willing to leave behind being a caterpillar." "You mean to die?" asked Yellow, remembering the three who fell out of the sky. "Yes and no," he answered. "What looks like you will die, but what's really you will still live. Life is changed, not taken away. It isn't that different from those who die without ever becoming butterflies." "And if I decide to become a butterfly," said Yellow hesitantly, "what do I do? Watch me. I'm making a cocoon. It looks like I'm hiding, I know, but a cocoon is no escape. It's an in-between house where the change takes place. It's a big step since you can never return to caterpillar life. During the change, it will seem to you or to anyone who might peek that nothing is happening. But the butterfly is already becoming. It just takes time. And there's something else. Once you are a butterfly, you can really love. The kind of love that makes life new. It's better than all the hugging caterpillars can do." Now, I think it's wonderful that we're here at Immanuel, a bunch of caterpillars. And it's wonderful to embrace and to hug and to be together, to experience life as we do in community. But we weren't meant to be caterpillars. We were meant to be butterflies. We're not meant to be just you and me. We're meant to be the beloved children of God. The love that we've learned already will be eclipsed by this new love we discover in Christ Jesus. Yes, it may feel like dying, but we're really coming alive. In the dark of night, when it's only you and God, don't you really want to be a butterfly? Don't you really want to be the man or woman that only God has seen to this point? Don't you really want to come alive and to love in a way that transforms life? That is exactly what the crucified Christ offers us. For clowns to become butterflies. Clowns with a cross to become sons and daughters of God, salt and light and leaven for the entire universe.